Last week I was sick of the meta. Now I'm just sick. But to help stave off this cold, Standard is packing the heat right now, right before the release of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, despite the lack of cauldrons, brew mode's been activated for players in the format. Rictus, what's the metagame looking like?
Forecast this week is a flood pit that drowns out your local ley line and your cute Kona at the zoo. Stay tuned though, because Lightning Helix might just strike you from a passing Shiko. Get ready, Rebels, because everything's about to change in this week's... Alrighty, gang, it's the season roundup. I went through 7 major tournaments this week and noticed a common trend. People are already prepping for Vivi's demise by playing alternative choices. To reiterate, that means that before we got our ban this week, the majority of the competitive scene was so sick of Vivi that they simply opted out of playing the best deck in the format just to get a head start on the post-ban meta, and that should tell you how massively unpopular Vivi Standard was. Now, I know y'all are ready to dive into the new metagame, but to get where we're going next, we need the context behind the Spiderverse meta to understand which archetypes are primed to evolve now that Vivi, Nemesis, and Profts have been exiled forever. Without further ado, Athena, let's get to the Spiderverse awards.
This season, we covered 75 major tournaments. To absolutely no one's surprise, Vivi Cauldron took down 25 of them, notching a 30% average meta share across the season. Cauldron started as 25% of the meta, but as the weeks went on, it consistently evolved and shifted flex slots to defend its throne from all contenders, creeping its meta share steadily upward. Vivi reached its zenith in week 6 when it took down Spotlight Liverpool, claiming 6 out of those 8 top 8 slots. Congrats to Cauldron for taking first place during the Spiderverse. So long, and thanks for all the Vivs.
Mono Red came in second place this season with 16 trophies and a 22% average meta share. Red started the Spiderverse at 16%, but quickly climbed into the mid-20s as it was one of the only archetypes to hold Vivi in check. While many were shocked at the Screaming Nemesis ban and the absence of a leyline ban, I think most of us are just thrilled at the prospect of Lifegain returning as a reliable check on aggro.
Dimir rounds out our Tier 1 contenders for the Spiderverse by coming in third place with 8 trophies and a 13% average meta share. Kaido and friends may have started strong with an 18% meta share, but there were some rough patches along the way, including weeks 3 and 4 where it bottomed out at 7% of the meta. Curiosity did manage to dodge the ban hammer though, so many are calling this archetype the heir apparent going into Avatar's release next week. Make sure you're ready, because Dimir has been chomping at the bit for this opportunity.
Our challengers this season were a little tougher to discern. We saw a plethora of archetypes come and go each week as someone new tried to take a shot at the top 3 with their latest concept. Therefore, we decided this category is based on trophies more so than average meta share, as the new challengers don't always come into the season in week 1, so we're looking for how they performed against the Tier 1 decks when it counts, rather than their running total across 8 weeks.
First up in the challengers list is Simic Counters, taking home 5 trophies and ending the season at a 5% meta share. Simic emerged in week 2 of the Spiderverse, quickly putting up its first trophy with the Nope Rope and peaking in week 4 with a pair of trophies and 9% of the meta. It's since fallen out of favor as competitors adjusted to the linear play patterns, but don't dismiss this one too early. We've got some upgrades coming in Avatar, so stay tuned and we'll show you how to rebuild this for Avatar Standard.
Second place in the Challenger tier is Sultai Bringer with 4 trophies, though only a 2% meta share at the end. Sultai's season was highlighted by a top 8 finish at Spotlight Liverpool despite the influx of Vivi, letting us all know that this deck will be more of a menace than Jonah Jameson rants about, now that it isn't dealing with mainboard cauldrons and 30% of the meta. If you'd like an in-depth guide on the theory behind this deck's composition, be sure to check out our Rebel Academy video breaking down the logic. Coming into Avatar, this archetype looks to have a breakout season, so make sure you're packing Grave Hate for week 1.
Finishing out our challenger tier in third place is Jeskai Control, snagging 3 trophies in the Spiderverse while ending the season at a whopping 18% meta share. The absence of mainboard Cauldron also unlocks Shiko-based control once more, precluding the need for a splash into black and giving us a much stronger mana base. This deck is red hot as we hit the next season, so stick around while we highlight a few new tools from Avatar.
There is no Brewer's Corner this week, but next week make sure you tune in as we have a brewtastic episode planned with Avatar releasing onto Arena.
Similarly, we have no Ahead of the Curve segment this week as the metagame changes 4 days after we release this video. Kinda pointless. In the meantime, let's take a look at our current top contenders and what Avatar is bringing each of them for Thanksgiving.
all eyes are on Dimir since it survived the bans unscathed. We return once more to the proverbial well of tempo in the hopes of finding our next contender for the throne. Athena, what cards from Avatar excite you for this archetype?
So, one thing that's really nice about this archetype, now that we're out of this Cauldron red meta, is that we can start to upload more on these Cauldrons and Kaidos that we were starting to cut towards the end of the season, at least from the main board, right? We can be more aggressive. We can be the aggressive deck of the format. And so cards like My Scornful Striker fits this really well. It pairs punishment with, it pairs the aggression with punishment for interaction, which is exactly what Dimir wants to be doing. We don't mind taking 2 to 4 damage if we're winning the tempo war. If we're looking at sideboard cards, right, the Unagi of Kyoshi Island is a great top-end threat against mid-ranger control if we do need that. You know, every time they draw a card, then we're going to get to draw 2 cards, and that sort of thing, added on top of that, the ward and the big body, is perfect against these types of control decks. We're looking at Ty Lee Chi Blocker. If we need additional Flood Pitch Drowner effects, they're available. We have them right here. It's 3 mana, but it locks down the creature permanently as long as you have the Ty Lee on the board. So, nice little piece of pseudo-blue removal there. And then also, just in case Kona decks become top tier, we can always look at cards like the Fire Nation Drill. It's removal on a stick with a random but relevant bit of text that stops the Kona's hexproof through Lost in the Maze, which lets you finally get in and kill a creature despite them getting the nuts draw. I think Dimir's really well primed to go into Avatar. Even some of these might not make the list. I'm 100% sure we're going to see some number of My Scornful Striker in the deck, one way or another, and this deck just looks really strong. We get to go back to being the tempo deck of the format, we get to bring all the aggression in, and we get to bring in cards like Bat again. Now that Nova Hellkite is gone, because Red isn't as much of a player, Deep Cavern Bat looks pretty good.
So we see a few new pieces here to upgrade the deck, but does Dimir have natural predators in the format that also get upgrades?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of stuff that doesn't get upgrades, we have things like Caretakers, Gruul Delirium, right? These other sorts of strategies that exist. But if we're looking at upgrades, we see Simic Counters getting some big ones.
Well, speaking of Simic Counters, let's take a look at our second challenger.
Simic Counters ended the season at lukewarm temperature, failing to make the top 8 of Liverpool and underwhelming us with trophies at local events. However, we've got some new toys in Avatar. So Rictus, tell us about our latest upgrades.
So you'll note there's only 56 cards in this, and that's because this isn't even a question mark. There's going to be 4 Badger Mole Cub that go into this deck. Probably it's going to take the place of the Azure Beast binders now that we don't have to hold Cauldron in check and we're not quite as worried about what our opponent is doing. We are the tempo deck, we are the aggro, and Badger Mole Cub is going to almost guarantee that turn 3 Uro. It's also really good at guaranteeing a quick Quantum Riddler and just dumping your hand so that all of a sudden this becomes more of a Riddler deck where you just dump your hand, reload, dump your hand, reload, because you have so many mana dorks now. You're going to be playing with 12 of them in the main, right? Outside of that, Ty Lee, still an opportunity here if you want it. Again, I don't know how many Flood Pit Drowner effects you really want in this format, but if you need a 5th, if you need a 6th, that's where Ty Lee's going to come in. It is going to be contested with Sentinels, with Sirachs, with Tyvars for the people still playing Tyvar, and maybe Tyvar actually starts to matter now that we have Cubs, so we have more mana to play with. That's going to be something we have to answer as we get a little bit further into the format. Just like Dimir, the Unagi of Kyoshi Island is also a sideboard option here against Control. Once again, we can decide if we want to go the Riddler path or we can go into the Kyoshi Island path. Last but not least, Ba Sing Se. This is going to give us some insane staying power against Control if it fits the game plan that we're aiming for, and I think it will. I'm not saying you're going to run a playset. I'm saying this is the man land that you probably want 1 copy of because it does a really good job in the matchups where you hit Control and you just need to know that every land off the top is a creature now. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Last but not least, let's note that Keen-Eyed Curator, it's 2 of in the main of this. It may end up being a 4 of. If those Reanimator strategies surge, if we see, Superior Reanimator just making a comeback, Keen-Eyed Curator's coming back as a 4 of.
Yeah, Keen-Eyed Curator has always been a really good card against Graveyard Hate, and even just on rate, right? 2 mana 3/3 can sometimes just become a 7/7 trample randomly in games. I mean, it's a good card to just have in the back pocket if you ever need it. Between these 4 new options, obviously the Badger Mole Cub makes us a little more susceptible to sweepers, but do we have enough staying power to handle sweeper-heavy archetypes?
I think that's the question we get to answer now that we have Badger Mole Cub and Quantum Riddler. Like, this deck might actually end up being one where we play 4 Riddler in the deck because we need to be prepped for sweepers, and we're not trying to play this game of let's try and have the right counter at the right moment. I'm not saying we can't play Repulsive Mutations or Detect Intrusions or Disdainful Strokes or Negates. We can play all of those if we want to, but we have the ability to also just say, okay, let's just start deploying 2 creatures per turn, and when we run out, Quantum, draw 2. You know, like we can just play this game because we can take the 2-for-1s against us with Riddler, and that's the beauty and honestly kind of the terrifying part of Riddler being legal and not getting banned.
Oh, yeah, that's true. When scaling mana dorks into beastly beatdowns doesn't appeal, you can always sweep them away with a classic control archetype. Let's take a look at Shiko and Friends with Jeskai Control.
No deck comes into the new season with as much heat as Jeskai Control. The question remains, though, can it adapt when it has a target on its back? Athena, do we get a power spike in the new set to help keep Jeskai rolling?
I think we could potentially. If we do get a power spike, the big thing is going to be the lessons package. It looks really promising if we can reasonably fit enough of these lessons in the deck. The ones immediately standing out to me: Accumulate Wisdom, amazing draw spell. It can end up being a 2-mana draw 3 without actually drawing cards, so you don't get punished for that effect. And then at the same time, it also just is really good off of Shiko. If you thought Stock Up was good with Shiko, how about Shiko into draw 3 cards? Seems pretty good to me. And we do have other lessons that act as removal spells, right? We could take out some of these, 1 copy of Get Lost, and we could take out a couple of other cards here and there that are removal spells to put in these red removal lessons. Firebending lessons, Iroh's Technique, Combustion Technique, all quality red removal spells. And because of the lesson tag on them, they do feed into your Accumulate Knowledge. So this will help you kind of fit this deck more into that lessons package, and it'll also let you play with some new sideboard tools. Dragonfly Swarm is a really good sideboard threat against midrange, and so is Ran and Shaw. And these cards are both really good, at least Dragonfly Swarm in particular is really good into Dimir. The Ward 1 is really good if you're on the play. It stops the Flood Pitch Drowner from coming in and messing your whole day up. It's just a flying blocker that scales really well, can threaten Kaido. Really good card to look at, right? And both of these are dragons, right? They fit your Behold strategy really well if you're still running Dispelling Exhale after all of this. The other card I want to bring up is the Unagi of Kyoshi Island. Really good sideboard piece if the meta ever gets another deck like Profts that draws a second card regularly. Hell, this card's actually not that bad into Dimir. It punishes their Curiosity, it punishes their Kaido, and that ward effect makes it pretty hard to tap down.
So, as far as this deck goes, I want to look ahead even further than this. Strixhaven is on the slate, right? It's coming back. This is a deck that we just talked about, lessons being potentially an upgrade for the list. Are you excited for Strixhaven in particular, and is that when this deck might get its biggest bump in power if it gets something that has like a learn mechanic to go with all of these lessons?
Oh god, if we get a Strixhaven learn mechanic, I'm actually really worried about how many decks are going to be learn decks. Especially if the learn cards are as playable as they were in Strixhaven. Even if the lessons weren't as good back then, the lessons are crazy now, right? You have land destruction, artifact removal, enchantment hate. You have all these types of effects stapled to lessons now, card draw, removal, and it's really going to be, you're going to be hard pressed to not run lessons in some form if we do get a learn mechanic. That said, if it just pumps out even more playable lessons, the ones that we have here get even better, right? So, I don't know, I'm excited. I think that Control can push towards this Lessons archetype if we get enough of them.
Yeah, it'd be a good subgenre. That said, I mean, Control, it tends to be public enemy number 1 in a fair format. So let's take a look at what the unfair options could be first with Sultai Bringer.
All right. Well, vampires and demons and spiders indeed, we're here for internal spooky season. But can Sultai thrive after Halloween? Rictus, what's the latest tech for your favorite deck?
All right, gang. So went through the whole spoiler, the few cards that really stood out to me, and there's not a lot for it in this specific set. Just FYI, Lorwyn will give us at least one big power piece in Formidable Speaker. But for Avatar, Ko the Face Sealer. This card could be nuts. So we're cheating this effect in at 4 mana with Kavaro, and that's strong. It gives us that mid-range non-reanimator plan, and I want to emphasize that because everybody looks at reanimator decks and they think, okay, so we'll take game 1 when there isn't a ton of hate, but then game 2 hits and all of a sudden there's Rest in Pieces, Ghost Vacuum, Soul Guide Lanterns, you name it. They're bringing it in. And so the natural inclination is to just play as much anti-hate as possible, and next thing you know, you end up with a really clunky reanimator deck where you're sitting there with, Pick Your Poisons, Heritage Reclamations, Disruptive Stormbroods, these cards that are a little bit more narrow and don't really help you combo. They just help you take care of the hate cards that have already blown out your graveyard, right? And that's not necessarily where you want to go. One of the alternative strategies with reanimators, you play a fair game 2 and you say, okay, we'll take out the bringers at the top end and we'll just push into a mid-range plan, and they play grave hate and we don't care. We'll still be set up to make them show us that hate, so if they don't, we can combo off, but we don't have to do the full combo. We don't have to go into Bringer. We can just go into Ardens. We can go into Ko, the Face Stealer, right? And I think that card in particular is the one that I'm going to be looking at because it also ends the opponent's ability to build up their graveyard. And the random addition of those activated triggered abilities, that may come in handy depending on where the meta goes. Outside of that, my Scornful Striker, early pressure against control decks, that also might be a viable way to go post-board against these control decks if we're not trying to go into the Myojin path where we're just trying to nuke their hand, but we're instead saying, okay, the Striker comes down, you've got very little time. We're just going to go very aggro on you, and we're going to force you to interact with that, and when it's dead, it's kind of come back out of the grave if you're not careful.
Yeah, between Scornful Striker and your Oblivious Bookworms and your Emmet Selches, you do sort of have this weird mid-range game plan that's available to you when you board them into control, right? But if this deck becomes a top contender in the metagame, Rictus, what's the best way to attack it?
Honestly, the best method I've seen to attack this is speed. If you play Leyline Red, I hate you already. That is the problem. I played against it, and it's just so damning when they go turn 0 Leyline, and you're sitting there like, okay, I have to have turn 2, turn 3, and turn 2 removal, turn 3 removal, and it needs to be Awakened, and we have to mill into what we need from Kavaro. And by the way, we can't necessarily just Kavaro into a Bringer because we might get the Slick Shot we just killed back on their side, and then they just double pump, trample right through. It gets insane. So Leyline is terrifying for me. I can't stress that enough. It's a terrifying matchup for this. But outside of that, hardcore control can take this out if it's just primed and ready for it. And that's kind of like Dredge, right, in Vintage, where if no one's looking, Sultai Bringer is really difficult to interact with and deal with. But if you bring the right kind of hedges against it, it can collapse right on its face. So it just kind of depends on how much the format wants to hate it.
Well, it looks like Bringer's bringing the heat, and Standard's cooking enough for us to eat. We'll be keeping an eye on the format as it continues to evolve through new set releases, so make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell so you can get all your latest meta updates.
Join us next time for a Brewtastic episode as we kick off Avatar Standard Season. In the meantime, comment below, let us know which card you are spec buying from the new set, because I'm ready to argue with you about what the price should be.
Come for the analysis, stay for the bloopers. You know what happens next, Rebels. Untap, upkeep, resist.
How long do you really want to talk about these decks?
It depends. It's fucking Simic all day. Fucking Dimir, who gives a shit? I can't believe they banned Screaming Nemesis. That shit's wild to me. They're like, oh, we banned it because we needed to ban something from Red because our stats show that it was just as strong as Cauldron. No, you motherfuckers. They're running Cope cards in their fucking slots, and they can actually fucking cover for one of them because Cauldron's in the meta. You take Cauldron out of the meta, now they don't have a good 1-drop or a good 2-drop to fill those spots. We're running fucking Burnout Bastronaut, and they go back to running fucking Sarkon. Fucking Sarkon D's nuts how fucking bad that card was.
The voice is holding up okay then?
Yeah, I'd say so. I feel like I have a little bit of a rasp, but who knows? Maybe some lesbian enjoyers can enjoy that.
Yeah, it's got that vibe you smoke cigarettes and drink whiskey. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that fits for someone who's raging about Magic right now, so.
Add in a lack of shower and you're right there.
Yeah.